Okay, once we've started up our save, we have to take a couple of steps to get everything within the save set up first. There are a couple of things I tend to do before I make any changes to the tactic, before I look into transfers, before I touch any of that stuff. And we're going to go over some of that today, and we'll go over a few other things a little bit later on, because there's actually quite a few things that I do. For me, usually with a new game, it'll take like 2 to 3 hours of work in the game before I go to the next screen. That might seem a little bit out there, but it might make sense to you once we go through it. So we're going to go take a look here. This is where we are with our new save. I haven't even looked at any of the mail. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to the staff screen, but we're not really so worried right now about hiring new staff. We are going to hire staff to fill all of these slots, and we'll do it together. So I'll show you how I do it, and I'll show you what I take away, and we'll talk about why we don't want to fill certain positions and why other positions are probably useful. It also is going to depend a little bit on our finances, so there'll be a couple of things for us to worry about. But before we get into that, we want to go here through the responsibilities. Now, the responsibilities in Football Manager, the way that it's set up by default, will take some things away from you that you might want, and will also give you some things that you might not want. This all depends upon what your philosophy is when you come into playing Football Manager. Personally, I tend to like to be very, very hands-on with things, and I don't really trust the AI. I don't trust the AI because of experiences that I've had. So we'll go through here and we'll take a look. I like to go through the responsibilities one by one, and we'll explain some of this. So you have the board. You're not going to be able to change this, right? It's going to be Takikawa Richiro, who is going to be in charge of everything, and that's just the way that it is. I can't do anything about it. He can hire me and fire me and do whatever he wants, so hopefully he won't fire me. We go over here next to staff responsibilities, and this is where things become interesting, right? I want to be in charge of the team selection for the first team. For under 21s and under 18s, I really don't care. I'm okay with Sakai Nakoi and Nagai Shunta taking control of that, so we're going to let them take control of this, no problem. Now, in terms of everything else, this is all like hiring staff for these teams. I want control over that. That might seem to be a little bit down in the weeds, but when we start hiring the staff, I think you're going to be able to see why we want to do that, right? We want to make sure that we have a team that is set up the way that we want the team to be set up. We want to set up a certain culture here at this team, and I don't trust the AI to do what I want to do, so I'm taking control of that. Same thing here goes for the contracts. Contract negotiations in the game are tedious, right? They're not very well done, right? Fortunately, they don't involve a whole lot of like back and forth type steps and stuff like this like they would in real life, but it's still pretty tedious, right? But you want to handle it yourself, especially if you're trying to manage a budget, and especially when you're with a team that doesn't have a whole bunch of money. Now, in terms of advice and reports, this is where you can go. If you're tired of having your meetings, if you're tired of getting analyst reports and stuff like this, you can change it all here. This used to mean a lot more in the game when you would get email from these guys with stuff that was completely useless. It's all now part of that staff meeting once a week. I just let it stay in the staff meeting. I don't really care. But if you don't trust somebody or whatever, you can go in here and you can change who the person is and all that stuff. That's where you do that. Scouting is where what I do is a little bit controversial. So I know the Football Manager has developed this huge, like, crazy scouting system where we go in and we can, have all sorts of fun things happen with the scouts, and we can send them off to the world, and they come up with reports, and they report back to us and do all of that, and it is kind of like handled by the game. I don't like that system. My experience is that in general, it will give me a group of like about 40 players, and then I won't ever get anybody else. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take control of assigning scouts, and we'll let them, of course, worry about scout feedback. Now, you can see here that we don't actually have a scout head, but we'll worry about that later on. When you scout a player, add him to your shortlist. For don't shortlist, we're not going to shortlist them until we know that we want them. And then we're going to watch players until full knowledge. The reason why we want to watch players until full knowledge is because what we're looking for is anything that might be a reason for us to stay away, like inconsistency, injury proneness. We want to see how fast the players are because we're trying to min and max the game. You don't have to do that. If you want something more realistic, you can scout a player a little bit and then just go based on a vague recommendation. That's another way to play, and I've played that way before. But in this case, we want to get as much accuracy as we possibly can. In transferring contracts. All of this is set up by default for you to do. I recommend doing all of this. You don't really want anybody else signing players for you. If you want to have a difficult game, though, you can have others take control of this and try to just manage, or you can have your director of football take control of all transfers and then sort of see what they do. Or you can turn it around and try to make it so that you don't actually manage anything and you act as the director of football. There are different ways to set that stuff up. This offer via Transfer Room is very similar to how this was before. I don't worry about this. I just do it all myself. If I'm going to put somebody out on loan, I'm going to worry about it myself, even if we have a lot of players. Now, in the media, this is where you go if you want your assistant to handle press conferences for you. I'm going to handle them myself, right? Because I want to become immersed in the game. But if you want your assistant to do it, you can go here and you can have your assistant do it, or you can have them only do broadcast interviews or whatever. You can set it up however you want. Training is one of the important things. We want training emails and we want to lead training for everybody because I don't trust the computer. Now, the default trainings are not horrible, but we still want to take control of this, and we'll see why a little bit later. Tactics, we want to make sure that we... Let's see, do we want to provide opposition instructions or not? I'm actually going to delegate the opposition instructions for the time being. We might come back to that a little bit later. But yeah, that's sort of a question whether you want to tell your players individually, like yourself, who to watch out for, or give it to your assistant. I'm going to give it to my assistant. I'm not very good at that part of the game. Now, the other thing that we want to look at is match day. So general, handling touchline shouts. Touchline shouts are the things where you like shout at your players. You can do it once every 10 minutes or so. As a human, I have a hard time keeping track of that and keeping up with it, especially if I'm trying to play games quickly. So we're going to delegate that over to the assistant. Now, this person might not remain the assistant manager, right? We'll take a look at that a little bit later on and decide whether we want him to be the assistant manager or not. Speaking of which, I'm kind of wondering if, since it says assistant coach, I'm wondering if the language is still set on U.S. American. Anyway, it's the same thing. We don't want backroom staff to arrange friendly matches for the first team squad because we want to arrange those ourselves. What we do want, though, we do like it if unfit first team players are available for both of these teams. We want to arrange friendly matches for all the teams. We don't want to have them arrange friendlies because that's how we're going to make money. So that's one of the things that we really want to do. Now, if you really want to, you can put yourself in to lead matches for all of these teams and get really busy. We don't want to do that. But you can do that. There are different ways to play. You can play that way if you want. And then handling team set piece takers lists, handling set piece personnel lists and stuff like that. I'm not going to worry too much about that. We're going to let the computer handle all of that stuff because it's a really, really tedious part of the game. So we're not going to get too deep into it. And so there you go. In about 8 minutes, that's basically how I set up staff responsibilities in Football Manager. This is, believe it or not, a very important part of the game because this really influences how the course of your save is going to be. You want to set this up the right way the first time, and it's one of those things where you really kind of want to set it and forget it, and that kind of dictates how your game is played. Now, you can change all sorts of stuff if you want and, take a lot of burden off your shoulders and put it on the virtual people who are working for you. But if you do that, do not feel really frustrated that they're doing the wrong thing. They likely will. And there you go. That, for me, when I start a new save, is always the first thing that I do. I want to make sure those are set up. Also, if I'm on a journeyman save, I go to a new team. This is the first thing I look at. Make sure it's set up the way that I want it, because it's going to dictate everything that happens afterwards. And if it's not set up right, I'm going to look at my team and, we're going to say, like, hey, where's all this stuff? How come the under 21s and under 18s aren't here? Well, to get that, you have to go over to training and make sure that you're in charge of training. When you're in charge of training, then you can see that. If you're not in charge of training, it'll go away. So we don't want it to go away. We want to know everything about these teams, and we want to make sure that we're in charge of the training schedules. Football Manager is kind of weird like that. It's just set up so that you have to have something clicked on to get the other thing to pop up right and whatever. Anyway, there you go. Hope that was helpful for some of you, especially those of you new to the game. And I'll talk with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.